Hey Curio friends, today we're going to learn how to paint this fall pumpkin. So stop at Curio or order your kit online at curiocool.com, open it up, get everything you need, and I'll show you how to paint your pumpkin step by step. All right, art friends, once you pick up your kit from Curio, be sure to open it up, get out all of your supplies. You're gonna wanna get yourself a cup of water and a paper towel so you can dry off your brush in between your colors. So today we're working on a fall pumpkin. It's gonna involve a lot of shading, so I normally recommend it for slightly older students. It's a little bit more of a difficulty level that's a little bit higher than some of our other kits, just because shading can be tricky and it's something that takes a little bit of finesse. But remember, your project doesn't have to look like mine because we're different people, and that is awesome, and our things should look different. Feel free to use your paints in the cup, or you can put them on the palette that's provided for you. We're gonna use quite a bit of mixing in our palette today, so you can feel free to use either the cups or the containers or the palettes, however you see fit. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna take my smaller brush and I'm going to work with my darkest colors first, because we want this area to look like it's going in and folding down into the pumpkin, or like the stem is growing up out. So for us to be able to have some depth, what we want to do is we want this area that is in between like the segments and the sections of the pumpkin and the area around our stem to appear a little bit darker. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to lay in some dark color by kind of going on top of these lines that are drawn. And I normally always start closest to myself. I don't know why I started up there, but I'm gonna start here. I'm gonna kind of pull down over top of this line. I always work on paper so that we can save the canvases for our art friends. And I like to move my paper or my canvas, whether I'm drawing or painting, I always like to work closest to myself. And please feel free at any point in time to pause the video if you're taking longer, or you can speed up the video if you're doing your project within like a couple days and you've already saw part of it or you already know what to do. And feel free to pause and fast forward as you need to. I always like to hold my paintbrush up in this metal part. I hold it the same way I hold a pencil because it gives me the most control over my paintbrush. I am kind of stopping when I get close to the edge of my paper, but for those of you using a canvas, make sure you even do the sides of your canvas too. If you paint the whole entire canvas and wrap it around the sides, instantly ready to hang up in your house. Because we all know you're gonna be so proud of it, you're gonna wanna do that anyway. There are tons of artistic styles. It's really important to remember that we're not going for perfection. That's not a thing that we try to strive for and think about in the arts. We want to make sure that we're having fun. For me, I always try to make sure that my friends that are in class are trying to feel relaxed and excited to learn something new, not upset that they didn't do something perfectly. And there's lots of different painting styles. Sometimes things can have a choppy look, sometimes things can be very smooth. So just because yours is different than mine or the person next to you, if you're painting this project with friends at home, it's okay if they look different. That's what makes everything so exciting, is when there's differences. We should be excited about those. So far it looks like we have some kind of weird spider thing going on here, but it'll all make sense together as we keep going. So we're starting with our darkest area first. Oh, hello, little art fly. So eventually these are gonna look like they're going down into our pumpkin. And what I'm gonna do also is I'm gonna take a little bit of this darker brown and I'm gonna do just a little bit kind of around the stem. So I'm gonna do a little bit more with just a little bit of like some kind of tracing around where my stem goes in. I'm not looking for it to necessarily be perfect, because we're gonna go over top of this later on too. Even if it's still wet when we get back to it later on, that's fine. And I'm actually going to do something called dry brush. I'm gonna take my brush, now that I've outlined this and most of my paint is off of it, I'm actually going to kind of wiggle my paintbrush back and forth. I'm gonna go this way because that's kind of the way that my pumpkin is growing. Whoops, that's okay. But I'm gonna take my brush and I'm gonna kind of wiggle some of this a little bit thicker paint away from my stem. And if yours doesn't look like this, that's okay. Everybody might have a different amount of paint. I'm not dipping my paint brush into the paint. I'm just kind of scratching forward the paint that's not really quite dry yet. But this is called dry brush because your brush is dry and you can even hear it going like across your canvas. See, this one's almost dry already because that's not as much paint there, but I'm just kind of taking some of this thicker paint, scratching it out just a little bit towards the middle of my pumpkin. And that'll help my colors to look like they're a little bit more shaded. I don't want to do it too much yet because it'll start to ruin my little tiny fine point brush, but just some areas where there's a little bit of thickness, I'm gonna kind of scratch that into it. And like I said, it'll make more sense as we keep going later on. What we're going to be doing is using our square brush to give the idea of depth. So what we're going to have is darker closer to the stem, and it's going to get kind of lighter and lighter as it goes back out towards the edge of our pumpkin. So we're gonna begin with an orange, and we're gonna make it a little bit lighter. You can do that by either adding white to it. You can put some orange and white together and make a lighter orange. The more white you add, the lighter it will be. So you can do something kind of like this and have a light orange in that way. Or what I like to do is I like to make my orange lighter by using yellow. Because sometimes we have oranges that are, or we have pumpkins that are really orange, and other times we have pumpkins that are more of a yellowy orange. So what I like to do is I actually like to work with my orange and my yellow together and actually mix on my canvas instead of mixing colors together on my palette and then moving them over. So I can kind of show you what I mean. So the tricky thing with shading is that you want things to be wet so that it blends together. So sometimes it's a little scary for people because that means you have to work a little bit more quickly, which can be a little scary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my orange. I'm seriously going to pick, kind of any spot to be able to begin with. I'm going to start with orange, and I'm not going to be shy. I'm going to lay this orange on here. And while this orange is still a little bit of a wetness to it, oh, there he is again, Mr. Fly. I'm going to actually take my yellow and I'm going to blend some of my yellow in with my orange, making it a lighter orange. And that's kind of how I'm going to be working with my shading. So I mix those two kind of together. So again, that's kind of starting even in a different section. I'm going to do my orange, and then I'm going to turn to some yellow without washing my brush in between. And I'm going to kind of rub these back and forth on top of each other to make kind of that yellowy orange color. So I am leaving some space at the top because this is going to be my shadow and this will be darker. So first I'm doing the light areas. And like I said, depending on how orangey you want your pumpkin, you could do a lot of orange and you could have it be much thicker. And then while my paint is still wet, I'm not even going to wash my brush. I'm going to dip right into the yellow. And if I have some orange still in my brush, it's going to mix that yellow and that orange together to make it a really nice yellowy orange. And you could play around with how much yellow do you want or how much orange. It all depends on how deep of an orange color you want for your pumpkin. And it's okay if each segment's a little bit different too, because we know that all pumpkins aren't perfect. So it's okay to have a little bit of areas that are a little bit different too. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do that for every single one. So we're gonna do some orange. While your brush still has orange, you're gonna dip it into the yellow and bring it to a lighter orange as you go down this way. And I'm gonna continue doing each one. And at any point, if you wanna pause, fast forward, do some, come back another day, that's okay too. Again, I'm turning my paper so that everything is close to me. And you can tell that I'm actually even painting over top of my brown lines a little bit too. That's fine. You're probably getting a feeling that it's like, whoa, she's almost not even taking her time, and that's okay. We can have things that are painterly. That means that you can see the brush strokes. So orange, yellow, and I'm just kind of going back and forth with my brush to kind of help mix those colors together. Get a little bit more yellow to get down here. Again, you can wrap around the sides to get your canvas painted all along the sides. If you have some colors at home, you could even add some red to your orange. That would make your pumpkin really have like a deeper, more of a reddish orange look to it if you want. I'm gonna make sure I put that orange right up against my stem, because the deeper, darker part of my pumpkin is actually going to be behind my stem where I don't see it. And we are painting long like this. We're not painting this way because when we see our brush strokes and they're going kind of the same direction as this pumpkin goes. Oh, I started putting yellow up there instead. Oops, this way. That's what I get for talking and painting at the same time. But the reason why we're going back and forth like this is to try and mimic how a pumpkin's striations are growing. By being able to do our brush strokes long ways like this, it helps the person looking at it have the illusion that this is the way the pumpkin's growing, and it helps to make it a little bit more realistic or understandable for them. Now you could, if you wanted to, you could be, like I said, using white the whole time. You could be doing something like this and then tossing in some white down here and making your pumpkin lighter with white. So that's what that would look like. Whatever you do, I would stick with it. If you want to pick orange as your bottom color the whole time, then stick with that. If you want to pick white as your bottom color this whole time, then stick with that. I wouldn't kind of switch back and forth between the two. I did it just to kind of show an example, but I guess I should have done that at the beginning there, huh? So people could see it with my yellow. I'm gonna add some yellow into here so it looks like I did everything the same. And this paint is very forgiving. So let's say you work on your project. Got a little too much yellow, I'm gonna put some off here. Let's say you work on your project and you're like, man, I'm not really feeling it. I just have way too much orange or way too much brown or too much yellow. Let it dry. And you can come back to it after it's all dry and put some paint back on top of it. It can be layered. That's the nice thing about using acrylics too, is that you can kind of let it dry and work over top of it again. So next what we're gonna work on is, I think, the little bit of a trickier part. See, when we add a lighter color, it can be pretty hard to add too much. Because when something is lighter, like this section has a lot of yellow, we can always go back in and add the darker color back in, and the darker color kind of takes over. What's hard is when we start to do the darker color, it's hard to take it away. So you have to be careful that you're only adding a little bit at a time, because there's quite a bit that makes, like, there's just like a little bit of brown will make quite a bit of difference when you're working on your project. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and wash my brush out. And now what I'm gonna do after I dry it here, I'm gonna put my orange up into this brown. And I'm gonna make sure this is wet. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna touch just the teeny tiniest bit of brown, because you can always add more, a little bit of brown. And I'm gonna start back at the stem, and I'm gonna bring this brown into my orange. And I can even, instead of washing, I can wipe off the extra. And I'm gonna kind of go back over top of this a couple times so that this brown blends into my orange. You might blend it so much that you don't even see it, and you might have to go back in and add like a little bit more, but add little bits at a time, teeny tiny amounts, because you can always add more, but it's difficult to take away. So I'm gonna add just a little bit of that brown to it, and I'm gonna start to go around and do that now in these sections. I'm gonna add orange, then I'm gonna touch a little bit of brown, and I'm gonna go in and add this brown to it, just kind of giving the idea of depth here just a little bit. And you're kind of using the orange as like a little vehicle to help it not be like tons of brown, but you're helping to soften it. So you're putting your orange down so that when you add your brown, it has something to soften and blend into. If we just put straight brown down into it, it would probably be too dark. And I actually like to leave some of these brush strokes like that. It looks a little bit realistic, like there's a shadow that's happening, a shaded part. And I'm going to, let me see here, I'm gonna do a little bit of a shorter shadow on this side and a longer shadow on the other side. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna make this brown only come out a little bit on the bottom and my left side. Then when I do the other side, I'll add more of a shadow. And you can even, if you have a lot of orange on your brush, you can even do a couple of sections at the same time. And you want to try to have it even. So what you're looking for is, you don't want an area where your shadow comes way down towards the end. You want it to have a little bit more of an even look to it, where like, it's not all exactly the same, but you can see that like on this side we have a little bit, it's kind of blending together. And now over here on this side, when I do it, I'm gonna make this shadow a little bit longer. And I'm gonna put down some orange in a couple spots here. And like I said, it's so nice and forgiving because you can let it dry, go back over top of it, dry, go back over top of it. So I'm gonna go back over top of this and add some more brown and bring that out just a little further. I'm gonna do it in a couple spots at the same time. And then over here, a little shorter. And this is like, you can play around with this for a long time. So you could add a little bit of brown. If you think that's too much brown, you can get your orange, put it back in, make sure there's more orange on top of there so that it blends a little bit nicer. So like I said, you can always keep kind of going back and forth between what colors and how far out you want them to go and what different things look like with where a shadow ends and where the highlight begins. If you feel like this is too light, you could always put more orange back on there and cover it so that you don't have as much yellow. If you feel like it's the opposite, you want more yellow, you could add more yellow back into it too. So you can really do a bunch of different layering with oranges and yellows here, adding more white maybe if you added white instead. And this has a little bit of a shadow because our stem is kind of in its way here, so it's blocking some of the light, so that's going to have a shadow too. And sometimes we can even go back in and add some of our shadowing and shading to the lines that we did at the very beginning too. So let's say as I'm painting this, you know, I could hold my brush sideways and I could kind of go over top of these brown lines where some of the first ones I did, and I did it with this little brush. But if I hold my paintbrush instead of this way to paint, if I hold it this way, it'll put a thin line on top of this. So I can actually go back in and go over top of some of my lines that I put in first, and I could kind of smear some of that brown back and forth on my line, and that kind of helps make it look like it has a shadow too, and that it's kind of shaded. Instead of that brown being all the way in the back at the first part we put in, we could bring some of that back up to the front, and that helps to make it look like it's really growing and bending in as well. You're gonna kind of play back and forth between using some of your lighter and darker colors. And maybe in the beginning you remember that we were scratching our brush just a tiny bit with dry brush. You can always bring something like that back in too. You could do something where you put this brown line in and then you wipe some of your paint off so your brush is dry, and then you move some of that dry brown around and just put it on top of your pumpkin section just a little bit, and that helps to make it look like it's blended too. So you can blend while things are wet, and you can also blend things when they are dry as well. But I always think that doing shading is a little bit difficult, especially on something this big, because you want to look and see, you know, does it look like it matches somewhat? Is one of your spots way brighter than another spot, or is one way darker? Because then you need to add a little bit more color to kind of balance it out. So what I'm doing now is I'm noticing some of these are too orange. So I'm gonna go, I'm sorry, they're too yellow. So I'm gonna go back in with my orange and kind of add some of this orange over top so that it looks a little bit darker, because remember, we want it to be darker in the center and then lighter as it goes out. And sometimes I take that extra paint, barely extra paint that's on my brush, and you can hear me scratch it just a little bit to kind of move some of that color down to another part so that it gives the person looking at it the idea that it is a little bit darker. And you will see brush strokes, that's okay, because if we wanted our pumpkin to not have any brush strokes, we could just take a photograph of it. So embrace the brush strokes for sure. I'm gonna add a little bit more brown to some of my areas. I'm gonna add a tiny bit more brown right up at the middle by my stem, just so the kind of darkest brown is right up at the very middle, and then it gets lighter and lighter and lighter as it goes out towards the edge of the canvas. So the next part we'll want to work on is our stem. And you can decide what you want to do with your stem. You could do it pretty straight green for the most part, or you could keep it a little bit of a darker green. If you want your green to be darker, you would add some brown to it for our shading today. Or you could also add some of your orange, because if I take some orange and I take some green and I mix them together, it'll make a darker orange or a darker green, because orange has some red in it, and red and green mixed together make brown. So you could always add some orange into your green to make it darker. You could also add some brown into your green to make it darker. And if you choose to do both things, you'll find that you actually have two slightly different shades of dark green because the color you mixed it with was different. So I'm gonna do actually what I did at the beginning. I really liked outlining it. So I'm gonna take my brown and I'm going to outline this just like I did before. And if you'd like to wait until this is completely dry, you can. You could take a hairbrush to it. Nope, not a hairbrush, that wouldn't help. You could take a hair dryer to it and that would help speed up the process. But there's no rush. Art takes time, so you can always take as long as you want to. You can let it dry overnight, put the video back on and come back. It's totally up to you. And I'm being the tiniest bit rough when I'm painting this. It's okay that it's not perfect, because the stem would actually be pretty textured, like it would be kind of pointed. I'm gonna switch to my larger brush because I like to use that just to cover more space at a time. And I'm gonna use a little bit of my darker green because I want this to be real dark. If you want it to be a lighter green, that's fine. If you even want to make it light brown, you could do that too. But I'm gonna start with my green. That might be a little too dark. Maybe I'll wash my brush off here first, dry it. I'll go in with this green first and see what that looks like. That looks a little bit too bright. Maybe I'll grab some of this darker green and some of that lighter green and I'll mix them together on my canvas here. I'm starting while my brown lines are still a little bit wet, so that if I bump into them, it just kind of blends my line a little bit more. And remember, you can hold your brush this way. You can also turn it so that it points up into these smaller areas too. and gets part of that smaller section. Even though you have a larger brush, sometimes people don't realize that you can use it two different directions to help you kind of achieve what you're looking for. So I'm gonna get these done, and I'm gonna kind of use both of my different shades of green I made because I want it to look realistic, and that means that it's okay if there's a variety of greens, because we know that looking at like a flower stem, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to have the same exact bright green the whole way through, and that's okay. And like I said, I'm kind of doing it while my brown is still wet, so some of my brown paint is mixing into my green paint to make that look a little bit more interesting. After I do my stem, I'm going to actually use my square brush because I like to use it all the time. I'm gonna, instead of washing my brush, I'm just gonna wipe off the green because I'm okay if some of the green is still in here. But if you can see it, I'm gonna wipe my brush off so that it gets really thin and pointed together, which is why you wash a brush out really well, because you want your brush to be able to go back like that. But I'm gonna go back in now that I've made my brush really thin by kind of wiping it off on a paper towel, and I'm gonna lay my brown back in just by going over top of it. And I'm just kind of going over top of the lines that were already there just to kind of bring them to the front, because we kind of made them disappear by going over top of them with green. And my very last step that I'm going to do, I'm going to take my brush and I'm actually going to pounce it like this at the top, because this makes it look kind of like it's been ripped off the vine. You could even get a tiny bit of green in there. And this just kind of gives it that rough look that you kind of turned it and pulled it off of where it was growing from. And that's that. You have an awesome little shaded pumpkin. Don't be too hard on yourself if it was tricky, because this is a very tricky idea. The idea of shading is really difficult. Even though you only have a few colors, it's hard to kind of keep them all separated. So be sure to subscribe to our channel, especially if you liked doing this. We have so many more options at curiocool.com. And if you're in the area of Zillionople, stop in for a class. Thanks. One thing I forgot to tell you was you can always add some highlights. So if you take some white, you can add in some highlights to some different areas to make it look like that's where light is hitting and reflected from.